Show Brother. Check it out now with Chunk Show Brother.
Hello people, a Chunk here with episode 4 of Brick by Brick for the Map Vessel. Today's subject is spawning. I'm going to talk about some of the fundamentals of setting up spawns, but most of this episode will focus on the specific spawning setup for Vessel. Let's start by talking about the initial spawn points. On Vessel, despite the fact that the overall shape is nearly symmetrical, you can see that the initial spawns have been placed asymmetrically. I've also split the spawns so that the two players on each team don't actually spawn right next to each other. There are several reasons why it might be smart to set up asymmetrical and or separated initial spawns. On Vessel, the influencing factors were elevation and weapon placements. Let me explain that a little more in depth. On this map, the blue team spawns on what I would consider to be the stronger side of the map, and they have the built-in advantage of having speed boosts spawn on their side of the map. In order to counteract that, I've done two things. The first thing I've done is place power weapons off to the sides, which should hopefully draw them into neutral territory. It also forces them to choose between claiming the uncontested speed boost and contesting for the stronger power weapons. The second thing I've done to counteract the blue advantage is to give the red team a positional advantage at the beginning. One of the red players spawns on the sniper side of the map. They're approximately the same distance from the sniper as the blue team, but they have more potential ways to approach the sniper, while the blue team only has one route to it, and that route can easily be grenaded by the red team to force the blue team to back off. The red team also has an elevation advantage on the sniper side of the map. Moving over to the plasma caster side of the map, we have a very similar situation happening to what I explained on the sniper side. The red team has the advantage in elevation and approach options, while the blue team is slightly closer to the plasma caster and has the option to easily obtain the speed boost instead. So that pretty much covers my thought process while setting up the initial spawn points. Now we're moving on to respawns. Respawns can single-handedly be the difference in whether someone likes or dislikes your map. One or two bad respawns in a game can totally ruin a player's experience. While there's no surefire way to set up respawns to avoid this, especially when you're doing the initial setup for the map, there are a couple of fundamentals that you should always keep in mind when adding respawn points to your map. They are placement and orientation. For placement, I feel like it's always best to place respawn points either behind or near cover. Nobody likes spawning in the middle of nowhere with the other team shooting at them. Spawning players near cover gives them a fighting chance, and it might just allow them to stay alive long enough for a teammate to come lend a hand. Moving on to orientation. Orientation refers to what players see immediately when they respawn. Ideally, a player should respawn facing either a pathway or an open part of the map. I always avoid pointing respawn points toward walls or other objects that might obstruct their view. I know firsthand that it can be really disorienting to spawn with a wall in your face, and the few moments that it may take a player to turn and figure out where they are could be enough time to get them killed. One final point that relates to both placement and orientation. For most people, their first instinct is to run forward when they respawn. Whenever possible, you should try to cater to that habit. A good rule of thumb is to allow players about 3 or 4 steps directly forward without running into anything or running off a ledge. The number of respawn points in a map can vary significantly depending on the size of the map. There are various approaches you can take. Some people prefer to pack their maps full of respawn points. Others are pretty frugal with their respawn points. Personally, I tend to lean towards a middle ground. I found that 6 to 10 respawn points for each initial spawn point seems to work pretty well. So on a 2v2 map, I'll usually fall somewhere in the 24 to 40 range for respawns. That's not at all set in stone though. Map style can play a big role in determining the number of respawn points. The amount of cover, the amount of overlap, the amount of dance floor, and a number of other factors also play a role in determining how many respawn points I place. There are two other things to keep in mind when setting up spawns. The first is spawn priority. This is a new feature in Halo 5, and I'm not too familiar with it yet as far as how it actually impacts spawning in real gameplay situations. But essentially what it does is allow you to prioritize particular spawn points or groups of spawn points. So if you have some really safe spawn points that you want to be used frequently, you can give them a higher priority and give the more vulnerable ones a lower priority. Finally, we have spawn zones. I'm not going to go in depth on them in this video, just because they don't apply to this map. Why don't they apply? Well, in my experience, spawn zones are often not needed in Slayer game types. This is especially true on asymmetrical maps, and even more true on asymmetrical Slayer maps that are made for low player counts. Vessel has no respawn zones on it, and I am pretty confident it will stay that way. That concludes our discussion on spawning. In the next episode, we'll be talking about playtesting and making adjustments based on those tests. I am actually going to be in the process of moving over the next few weeks, so I'm not sure when the next video will be ready, but I think it will be worth the wait. So stay tuned. Thank you for watching. Later, people.